Welcome to The Trauma Teacher, the podcast dedicated to transforming therapists into masterful healers with confidence, creativity, and clarity. I'm Janice Holland, and I'm here to guide you through the journey of becoming the therapist you've always envisioned, helping you step into your full potential and make a profound impact on your clients' lives. Each week, we'll explore powerful strategies, share inspiring stories, and dive deep into the tools and mindsets you need to elevate your practice and create lasting change for both you and your clients. Whether you're a seasoned professional or just starting out, the Trauma Teacher is your go-to resource for overcoming challenges, embracing your unique healing artistry, and thriving in your career without sacrificing your well-being. So if you're ready to become the confident, creative healer you were meant to be, you're in the right place. Let's get started. Hello, everyone. I'm super excited to be back with a new episode. Today's episode is something that I have been, it's really honestly the reason I got into the work that I got into, why I went back to school to become a therapist myself. So I just want to talk through what we're getting wrong in the mental health industry. And I don't just mean from like the licensed therapist side, but also from the coaching side. I feel like this is a little bit of a hot topic, kind of a passionate topic for people. So I hope that this episode just gets you thinking, gets the conversation moving. I am by no means claiming to be the end all be all or a like guru of any kind, but I do have my own personal life experiences that inform my opinions and my thoughts and you know what I'm sharing today, and then also what I've observed from my colleagues and my peers in the mental health industry, and then what I've experienced myself personally, professionally as well. So I'm really getting into what we're getting wrong, like how we're focusing and fixating on the wrong thing, and it's really causing our clients more pain and suffering, and that's the last thing that any of us the last thing that any of us want. We all want, obviously we go into this field to help people and to raise the collective and end the suffering, you know, play our part in ending suffering in the world. And it's just heartbreaking to me to observe how we're in many ways perpetuating suffering because of our own, we can't get out of our own way in some ways. So I'm going to talk about the details of that and then give some pointers and tips and advice on how to get out of the way so that you can accomplish what you want to accomplish in this field, which is helping people heal, ending suffering, and helping people evolve into a version of themselves that they're really proud of and that they're happy to be. So the first piece of this is when we really focus and overemphasize credentialing. I know in the therapy world, for sure, this is a really big deal. People are very opinionated about what kind of credentials you should be getting, whether you go into the social work side or you go into the LPC side or addiction recovery. Like there's all kinds of different credentials that you can obtain, whether it's a master's degree, a PhD, a PsyD, and then all the different, there's just so much. Right. And those, there are people who have really, really strong opinions about, this credentialing versus that credentialing and which one's better. And, honestly, I find those conversations to be a waste of time. Like you go into the field, like there's a specific reason why some people are more drawn to social work or some people are more drawn to LPC or clinical psychology or psychiatry, whatever. Like that's so... It should be informed based on who you are, what your experiences are, what is going to work for you, and the degrees you've already obtained. Like, so for me, I got an LPC license because I saw a clear pathway from the undergraduate degree that I had, the work that I was doing, the options I had just financially moving forward. There was just kind of a path lit up for taking that route and going. So I did it. And it doesn't really make it, it's like that's what got me to my profession quicker. And it doesn't make me any more, that alone is not what makes someone more or less effective in the work that they do. Right. So it's In my opinion, it's something that we waste time thinking a lot about and talking a lot about. Now, if you are somebody who's considering getting a degree and you want to look at all the different options, I think it's important to ask a social worker about their degree and their credentialing process, and ask an LPC about their degree and their credentialing process, and what access you have to different kinds of careers based on those different credentials. Obviously it's important to be informed about these things, but to spend time in judgment over someone else's credentials, it does nothing but create divisiveness. It creates confusion for the people who are seeking support and help, and it distracts us from the work that we're actually meant to be doing. Because at the end of the day, it's all about serving and helping people. And if I use my credentials that I've worked hard to achieve, and then also do the personal development work, and then continue to obtain more information and grow and develop my practice, then I am going to be, and I feel like I am, a very good, solid practitioner for anybody who comes my way. And it's because I've put so much work into who I am personally, not just professionally, and it doesn't have a lot to do with the credentials that I hold. So spending all this time, again, it is creating division and divisiveness where we could be coming together and really seeking, I would love to talk to a social worker and understand their perspective and the angle with which they learn things, and we can grow and learn from each other versus judging each other about what I learned and they didn't learn, and vice versa, if that makes sense. So, again, the problem here is the lack of focus on who we are as people and why we got into, I don't know anybody who went into this field who didn't have some shit go down in their past. I don't know anybody who went into this field who doesn't have their own issues that they faced and dealt with, and that's been a huge driving force for why they want to go in and raise the collective and end suffering for others, like in a way that we didn't receive ourselves. And I'm no different. Like, I definitely am somebody who came into this work because I had been through so much, and for me, because I had sought so much help, and I was just hitting roadblock after roadblock after roadblock because of the people that I went to who were trying to help me did create more setbacks and more suffering for me because they had so much of their own stuff that got in the way. So, for example, I saw an LCSW, I saw an LPC supervisor, I saw an LPC associate, I saw a clinical psychologist, and I saw a psychiatrist within a span of about 3 years after the birth of my oldest son. I had pretty severe postpartum depression and also had some memories coming up of some abuse that I had repressed. And so I was just kind of a mess and trying to figure out a lot of different things, very depressed and anxious and a new mom. It was just a really, really challenging time for me. And I went to all of these different people with these different credentials based on recommendations from friends, recommendations from coworkers, just anybody whom I felt safe enough to kind of open up to that was having a hard time. If they knew this person then I would go to them and try to receive support and help. And I can say that it doesn't matter the credential. I was hurt. And it wouldn't, from none of them was it ever intentional. None of them intentionally caused harm. It's just that they were focused on, they had gotten their license and they had their theory that they were working through, and I guess interests that they had in trauma or abuse, but they hadn't done enough of the personal work themselves, and they were getting in the way. For example, one had, came on to me sexually. It was actually an intern who I was like in a group with her, and this intern that she had brought in, I guess she didn't vet this person well enough, or she had blind spots to this person because of the relationship that they had before. I don't want to get into too much detail about it because it's the why this person was there is not as important as what happened. And this intern took an interest in me. And of course I was just so needy at the time for attention and understanding, and then I would just meet this intern for coffee, and this is already boundaries that were being crossed. And then she ended up trying to start a relationship with me. I did not identify, I've never identified as gay, but she really pursued that, to have an intimate relationship with me. It was very confusing and hard and obviously heartbreaking. And I was already dealing with enough, being a new mom and being overwhelmed and having postpartum depression and all this stuff with this abuse. And then she introduces her stuff in that situation and scenario. And it really created a lot of heartache and pain. I had another professional with a totally different set of credentials, but was credentialed, say that she really liked me and really wanted to be my friend. And she also crossed boundaries and started connecting with me personally and taking me to coffee and doing different things personally, and really said that she wanted to be friends. And then not too long into that experience, she began to express her frustration that every time we would meet up, every time we would have coffee or have lunch or go do things, that we were always only talking about me. And I was just like, I didn't know what to do. I was embarrassed. I was overwhelmed. I was like, okay, I thought saw her as like a mentor. And I, again, like I was put in a position as a client, as a very vulnerable person that I should have never been in the first place. And it was just scary and overwhelming and hard. And I felt even more broken and not enough. It just hit all those buttons of things that I was already having to manage and already having to deal with. Another one began seeing my husband as a client without informing me. Neither my husband nor her told me that he was going to have sessions with her as well. And when I found out, I was really devastated, and it felt like they were having an affair. And I don't believe that anything sexual was happening. In fact, I know nothing sexual was happening, but it still left those feelings of being betrayed and like I can't trust anybody. And again, issues and things that I was already dealing with, already having to process and manage. It just brought more of it up. So those are just a few, and I have some other experiences, but those are like the biggest ones. And when I open up and start sharing about this, the floodgates of people who began sharing very similar experiences, it's just heartbreaking. Again, when somebody makes the decision to go seek support, go seek help, start talking about their deepest, darkest problems, issues, things, they, many times they're monetarily investing in themselves, trying to get better and wanting to get better. And then those of us who are there and ready to serve and help get in the way because of our own shit that we haven't dealt with. It doesn't matter what credential you hold. It doesn't matter what theory you are operating from at that point, because you don't know how your own issues are interfering with the therapeutic process of the person that you're trying to work with. And again, for all of these people, in my own personal experience, I know that none of them were intentionally trying to hurt me. They were just living out their own pain stories and trying to help me and trying to fix me and get me better. And they saw something in me that they really inspired them and that they liked. But because of their own stuff, they needed to play that role. They needed to be the rescuer. They needed to be the one who really saw me and got me and could get me out of my shell and be the support that I've never had, blah, blah, blah. I get it. But they ended up causing so much more pain and suffering. And again, this is just my story. And I know, like I said before, like when I open up about this, I always get people who send me messages and DMs about, their experiences. They've had something very similar. So this is something that we need to talk about, and we don't spend enough talking about it. It's like enough time talking about it. We, when we're in school or when we're in supervision, we just talk about the client problems, the theory that we're going to use to address that problem, the framework or the blah, blah, blah. And all those things are super important. I'm not saying that they're not. And I'll get into more details about kind of the the problem on the other side of this in a moment. But if you're not also talking about, okay, what about you? How is this triggering you? How are you showing up in this situation? How are you relating to this? How is this, are you feeling insecure in session? Are you feeling like this client is really broken and can't be fixed and needs somebody to fix them? Like, what's happening with you personally? If these are not part of the conversations, and they have to be in order for us to keep this in check and to really understand where that line is and how to take care of our own needs and be sure that we're not getting in the way of the process for the clients that we serve. So this is really, this first part that I've been talking about is a big piece of coming at it from like a licensed therapist perspective. I feel my experience has been that life coaches, people in the coaching industry, the issue can be just as profound, but kind of in a different way. So from the coaching industry, they focus very much on who they are interpersonally, who the client is interpersonally, inspiring them, future focused, future oriented, and they don't have enough understanding of just basic theoretical frameworks of, what is happening with what is the biological what's happening in the nervous system, what's happening in the person's belief systems, what's happening cognitively and physiologically when somebody has experienced trauma. If you haven't spent time learning that and studying that, it can be really dangerous in session for you to just go in and be like, I just want them to know themselves. I've done so much work on myself and I just want to help them. That's a good perspective to have. I'm not saying that's not important. You need that perspective. But if you haven't balanced it with a study of understanding the, the basic framework of what happens with somebody in trauma and have some kind of theoretical framework with what you're operating, you can get lost in the weeds. You can lead your client down a path that's dangerous and leads it to more harm for them because you don't have clarity on exactly what's happening internally within people when they've experienced trauma or when they have certain specific symptoms or the dynamics between couples. And, you just need to have that framework and that study and that under your belt so there's a balance here, right, is my point. And I guess the overarching theme of this podcast, if I could just narrow it down to one thing, is yes, and we need therapists, we need life coaches, and we need both. Yes, and we need theory, we need frameworks, we need logistics, we need to understand nervous systems, we need to understand all of the physiological pieces of bodies and of emotion and of our minds and our system. We need to have all of that. Yes, and we need the relational piece. We need to know interpersonal pieces, and we need to know how we are disempowering ourselves just in our personal lives, because that will play out in your therapeutic practice. You need to understand the rescuer role and how, the interpersonal pieces of it. It's a yes and. So again, if I could narrow this down to one theme for the podcast, I do tend to chase bunny trails, I know, but it's yes, and we need to look at all of it. We have to hold space for all of it. We need to be in accountability in a way where we're learning and growing cognitively and in the latest research and in understanding frameworks and how they're evolving and growing and the kinds of people that they serve best. And we need to be working interpersonally within ourselves about our own pain points, about our own hang-ups and hold-ups and issues, and how we relate to people and where we get defensive and what our triggers are. If you're unaware of all those things, then they're going to unconsciously play out in the sessions that you have. I can think very specifically of some people that I was in grad school with who've gone on to have, great careers, but they're very clinical. They're very guarded. There's never there's very little self-awareness I see the sterility with which they practice. And then I also have, I can also think of some very specific people who are so in the feels that they just kind of swirl around in the feels, and everything's about how they feel and how their clients feel and both parties get lost. Both parties do good work, but can't get to the finish line with their client, can't get to the real coming alive self-actualization piece of it, because you need both in order to be able to do that. You need to pull together both sides in a really powerful, balanced way. And it takes somebody who with a lot of maturity, it takes somebody with a lot of self-reflective skills, and somebody who's really motivated, right? Somebody who continues to stay motivated to grow and evolve themselves personally as much as they want their clients to grow and evolve. So it's just so important for us to keep our finger on the pulse of both of these things so that we can powerfully show up for the people that we're serving. We're not perfect. We all have stuff that we're working through and that we're going through, but when you're really powerfully self-aware, then you have you've gained the tools to be able to support people and help them and grow and evolve. And as we continue to grow and evolve ourselves, your tool belt grows. It gets bigger and bigger and bigger. I want to bring up boundaries. And it's interesting when I bring up this word, I and my body feel like this contraction. I feel this like, oh, I don't want to talk about that. So like everybody talks about boundaries. We're always talking about boundaries. I don't want to talk about boundaries, but it's something that we're always needing to look at and work on. Whether you are somebody who is so guarded and your boundaries are so enforced and so high that your clients can't connect to you, they can't feel you, they can't, there has to be some level of interpersonal connection. That's where the healing really happens, is because as mammals, we have to have these connections to survive. So being able to have some kind of connection, or somebody who really struggles with boundaries and with understanding where those lines are, because a lot of times, growing up, there weren't any boundaries. And you had to learn how to manipulate boundaries in order to get your needs met, to survive. Then it's like we just unconsciously manipulate boundaries all the time. And so really being clear on how you can show up in a way that's connected, that's calm, that's grounded, that's interpersonal, but not so much that you can't be so rigid and have like no ability to be flexible. But then if you're too flexible, it leads to burnout. And honestly, both ways lead to burnout, because if your boundaries are so strong that you can't really connect with the people you're working with, and you're just all in your head and focusing on theory and practicing theory, then it like over time, you're not really getting to tap into your passion. You're not getting to tap into you as a person and bring you into your work. And so it gets boring. It gets, you just burn out, because it's like it's costing you so much to show up and stay so engaged and manage big needs and crisis. But you're not able to personally connect with the work that you're doing at all. Versus the other side, you're so personally connected, you don't know how to disconnect from it. You're in it all the time. You're taking client calls all the time. You're squeezing clients in when they have emergencies. So you're, overextending the hours that your biological body can manage work. Your family, you miss time with your family and connection with your family because you're squeezing in extra clients and working too much. You're too much in it, too much in your body. Then you're going to burn out on that end as well. So being able to show up boundaried, being able to show up in a way where you can limit the number of clients that you see in your work hours and work at sustainable levels, but also create joy and space for self-fulfillment and do things that bring you a sense of purpose outside of work, then somebody who can show up in that really balanced way in their life, you're sustainable long term over time. You're somebody who's the same, week after week after week after week. When a client comes to see you, you're present and available and consistent, and that this is creates a space where they can really evolve and change and heal and grow and thrive, because you can hold that really consistent, safe space for them over long periods of time, versus the opposite. If you are so in your head about it and you get bored with them quickly, or you're so connected that you are over invested in them and their life and their healing, then you burn out and you start to lose your ability to be consistent, because we're not meant to be, a caretaker of somebody. We're not meant to take on their burdens. Our job is actually to empower them to take on their own burdens. So we can get really lost in that. And those of us who grew up not really having a clear model for that, we just kind of have this assumption that being a little stressed out or very stressed out and working hard means that we're doing it right, means that we're successful. And this just doesn't prove to be true over time. You can be a very hard worker. You can be somebody who's very dedicated to your work. But if you don't know how to also enjoy your life, then you're not going to be sustainable for the clients you're serving long term, right? So, and then we lose the big picture. We lose sight of why we're here in the first place. And then we begin to just feel like the world is full of suffering and pain, and it very much is, but it also is full of incredible things and incredible experiences and joy and promise and new development. And we can't stay connected to that if we are operating out of kind of our default mechanisms, which can be a lot of times just to be in our head and be very functional, but not really be alive in who we are. This is something that's so easy for us to step into or stay in. It's like survival mode basically, but I typically call it a sophisticated version of survival mode, because we are high functioning. We can handle large amounts of stress. We are somebody who is typically there for other people no matter what's going on. In fact, the more overwhelming or stressful life is or situation is, the better we are. The more we're able to kind of lock in and show up and be grounded. And like, that's just part of the DNA often of healers, of people in helping professions. It's something I find in common with almost everybody in this profession. And it has to do with like our responses to stressful situations growing up. This is an asset. Absolutely, it's an asset that we have, but it's such a default for us that we tend to begin to just operate this way in life. And then the resentment starts to show up, or we start to really burn out, or we start to feel like life is pointless. This whole thing is pointless. Why am I doing this? I just want to go work on a beach somewhere selling, renting surfboards. I want to be doing anything other than in the grind with people. And this is a real indicator that you've lost that balance, because we have to be so intentional with maintaining it in order to be sustainable long term. All right. So again, my hope is that your takeaway from this is that you are challenged to consider where you fall on the spectrum. Are you somebody who tends to be very reliant and dependent on theory, on learning and knowledge and understanding and best practices and, really reading and researching and all of those things? Again, I'm not at all saying we need that. We have to have that actually to be effective. Or are you somebody who tends to fall on the other end of the spectrum, where it's all feels and how I feel and my own growth and my personal development and the development of my client, and you're so stuck in the just like personal development, healing, growth, that you're like, the theory doesn't matter, the license doesn't matter, all of that doesn't matter. It's all about how I feel. Like if you're kind of more stuck on that side, then you're also in a place where not only are you going to get overwhelmed and burned out, but you're going to be, it's dangerous for you to be seeing people, especially people with complex trauma, high needs, any kind of diagnosis. So we really need both. So I would like for you to just consider where on the spectrum you fall. If you tend to be somebody who's more in your head, and thinking and theory-based and knowledge-based and need concrete black and white answers, and you need to have a very clear black and white path that your client is on. Or if you're on the opposite end of that, where it's like I've already described it. I'm not going to go into it again. So where on the spectrum do you fall, and how can you incorporate more of what's not comfortable for you? So if you're very good at reading and research and theory and, gaining more degrees and studying and getting more certifications, and like you love knowledge, incredible. Keep in loving knowledge. How can you incorporate more of the somatics, more of the body work, more of the experiential pieces, letting your guard down, being vulnerable? What does it mean to be vulnerable in session? And it's interesting when I use this word with people who are in their head, they think that being vulnerable means like sharing their deep, dark secrets or sharing what's happened to them. And they're like, oh, I can't do that. Like, I'm not supposed to share any of my story with my clients. And you can be absolutely vulnerable and never share anything with your clients. That, being vulnerable doesn't mean you're sharing your dark secrets. I mean, it can be, incorporate that, but it doesn't mean that that's what that means. So how can you, do some research on incorporating more of the somatics? And it's interesting, if you feel like whatever space you have judgment towards, I am challenging you to do something with that someone or take a course in that. So if you are somebody who has a lot of judgment towards, yoga for trauma, or you have somebody who has a lot of judgment towards mystical or spiritual pieces of healing work, if you're somebody who has a lot of judgment towards life coaches, then I want to encourage you to explore learning in that realm. And conversely, if you're somebody who has a lot of judgment towards theoretical frameworks, if you're somebody who has a lot of judgment towards, psychology, clinical psychology, psychiatry, any kind of like medical model kind of things, I want to challenge you to set your judgment aside and lean into that world. What can you gain from it? What can you learn from it? What value is there in that world? How can you explore? How can you purposefully explore a world that you have judgment towards? And this is for all of us, all across the spectrum, because when we do this, when we lower our judgment, when we lower our, those judgments create blind spots. Those judgments create pieces that we're missing, because people need all of it to really heal and to grow. And when you have judgments towards one aspect of how we approach mental health, then you have a really serious blind spot, and that can cause you to unintentionally cause harm towards others. So if you have judgments towards personal development, or judgment towards like you're a therapist or a healer or in the mental health, but you would never go to therapy yourself, or you think that's ridiculous, you've never tried it yourself, you don't think you need it, that's a huge blind spot. There's nobody who doesn't need to explore who they are and how their experiences have influenced the world. We absolutely have. So if you're sitting there, I'm just like trying to think of every angle, because I can feel you listening to this and thinking, yeah, I hope this person's listening, or I hope this kind of person's listening. They need to hear this. No, that means you have a judgment towards that kind of person. And I'm challenging you to go learn in that realm, to open yourself up to seeing what you can get out of that realm that you have judgment towards. because once we're able to be open, it's fine if your perspective will always be more clinical. If your perspective will always lean more towards theory and having theoretical frameworks, and that's just the kind of practitioner you are, that is totally fine. In fact, that's good. We need people who are there. But instead of being judgmental towards somebody else who maybe takes a more mystical or spiritual approach, or another person who takes more of like a life coach approach, or somebody else who takes more of a somatic yoga body movement approach, what if you're open to that? What if you understand what those worlds, what those perspectives can give a client that you can't give, and we all work together to really help somebody work through every piece and fully self-actualize, because I don't know anybody who is operating fully alive and who they're meant to be who hasn't experienced all of that. They've explored the mystical, spiritual pieces that need to be worked on. They've explored the somatic body movement, energy movement within the body. They've done the talk therapy. They've done all of that. I mean, we need all of it. We need to work together. And if you are somebody who is more in the mystics and the spiritual, or a life coach world, you need to understand what the clinical world can offer and partner with that world when you need it, when a client needs it, right? Let's partner with each other. But we can't do that if we're in judgment of each other, and if we can't explore and understand what everyone else has to offer. So I hope that this podcast has served you, has challenged you a little bit to open your mind, to explore what area you can challenge yourself to open up to grow, to change. I have a membership. It's called the Courageous Living Membership, and we do all of it inside this. We have really solid theoretical frameworks with which we operate. You can choose to also enroll and get certification in the trauma model through the Ross Institute, which is very much research-based, so you can get a solid understanding. If you're not ready to add the certification, that's totally fine. The membership is about the yes and. It's about you getting good theoretical understanding of what's happening with somebody. It's mostly trauma-based, trauma-informed, because that's my, thing is I focus very much on trauma, complex trauma, childhood trauma. But it also is like, okay, how can we add somatic? How can we add movement? How can we add, we need all of it. It's very much a yes and space. It's a place for growth. It's a place for support. It's a place where we really care about each other. I work really hard to ensure that you have good, solid, not just theory, but practical information, tools to use in session, encouragement, support. I want to challenge you a little bit in there, but I also want to provide you with everything you need to feel like you can do your job at your highest capacity. You feel supported. You feel like I will bring things up in a way over time so that I'm helping you keep a finger on the pulse of all the different areas that you can be looking at and focusing on, so that you don't end up in a space where you're overwhelmed, where you're burnt out, where you are a shell of a person you could be. So that's what this membership is all about. I would absolutely love to support you. And also, it has CEUs included. So if you join by the end of the year, you will have 12 CEU credits. In my state, in Texas, where my license has to be renewed, it's 24 credits every 2 years. And I'm sure that you have, I make sure that you have what you need as far as ethics CEUs and diversity and inclusion CEUs, so that you can renew your license through the membership as well. So if you're curious about that, send me a message. I'm happy to chat. The link to join is in the show notes, and I will see you next time.